Welcome on in, everybody. Season 2 Blood of the Sands is on the PTR, and we get to take a look at those patch notes. There are lots of combat balance changes, and that's mostly what we're going to focus on here, so let's jump right into it. With this first release wave on the PTR, we get to test the summer event, the new 3v3 arena map, and the First Light retraction. Right off the bat, the first thing I want to say is that the First Light fort is the most popular open world PvP spot in the game right now. So I'm curious what the First Light retraction will look like, and whether or not we're still going to see that fort bonus maybe move to a different fort, or if that fort's going to continue to be there. I haven't been on the PTR yet, but this is something that I definitely am going to check out. And we'll get to test the rest of this stuff as the next waves of the PTR come in. So yeah, let's focus on what we got here for now. So let's start off with those general combat changes. All players have had an increase in base HP by 10%. And this is going to make up for the fact that the Hail and Hardy buff is being removed from towns entirely. I like this a lot because this just helps level the playing field between people who have this buff and people who maybe don't know about it, like newer players. Players can now leave combat 1 second after killing the final enemy, and they reduce the in-combat timer to 10 seconds from 20 seconds now, so it should be easier for you to swap your gear, etc. while in combat. There have been big changes to blocking, so let's start at the top one here. If your block is broken, you no longer become slowed by the exhaustion, and this is a big deal because block is now going to be effective against ranged attacks. One-handed weapons will reduce 50% of incoming ranged attack damage, with the stamina damage being reduced when that occurs as well. Two-handed weapons will reduce 30% of incoming ranged attack damage, and magic weapons will reduce 40% of incoming ranged attack damage. This is a huge change in the functionality to block and will have a massive impact on the meta for PvP, so I'm very curious to see how this will play out. But in general, I think that any game mode like OPR where you see a lot of ranged attacks, you will definitely see a change in how people are approaching mitigating that damage. Shields remain largely unchanged, but they did increase the base movement speed of the shield while blocking from 1.65 to 2 meters per second. Blunderbuss, they fixed a bug that was causing certain things to proc on dots with the splitting grenade ability, so that was something that people could abuse. That's a nice change there for sure, or fix. And then the only real change, Blast Shot has had its range increased by 1 meter. Bow, for the most part, got some fixes to things proccing off of dots as well. Rain of Arrows got a huge damage increase. The bleed is now 15% base weapon damage, up from 7.1. The cooldown is 20 seconds instead of 25 seconds, and the radius is now 4 meters instead of 3. And the big one, they reduced the time it takes for the arrows to be shot into the air and when the attack lands. So this is a fairly unpopular bow skill for PvP. A big change to it here, just functionality-wise, I think it'll feel better to use. So I'm curious to see what that'll look like on the PTR. The dodge and weave passive will only trigger while at full stamina. If you guys don't know, the dodge and weave is the passive that gives them the 10% movement speed bonus after they roll. So this is a massive nerf to bow's mobility, especially during the course of a fight where they are not at full stamina the whole time. Bow players will feel this. And then knee shot has been reworked to rending headshots so that you get a 10% rend for 3 seconds when you land a headshot on somebody. And the evasive tactics passive is now the ultimate in place of knee shot. So evasive tactics will give you 15% damage bonus when you roll. That was a normal perk before and is now becoming an ultimate perk. So this is net kind of a nerf to bow. Yeah, in general, it seems like bow got nerfed outside of Rain of Arrows, which got a pretty nice buff. Fire Staff, Incinerate got a bit of a damage increase to be 175% weapon damage, and they reduced the recovery of the attack. And Pillar of Fire lost a little bit of damage, going from 165% to 155%. I'm okay with the Pillar nerf. Pillar is very strong already. Incinerate, I honestly don't think this is big enough of a buff. I'm curious how good this attack will feel now. Have to test on the PTR. I play Fire Staff, so I will give it a shot, but I don't have super high hopes for Incinerate being super useful yet. Taking a look at Great Axe, Execute has gotten a nice little buff, 20-second cooldown instead of 25. Great Axe has really long cooldowns, so that's a nice change there. Whirlwind also got a buff. They moved up the cancel windows for block and dodge to be after the first spin instead of the second, so it should be smoother to transition out of Whirlwind now using your dodge or block. And then the movement speed has been increased by 15% while spinning, and the rotation speed has been increased by 20%. And then Reap, has had a little bit of a damage increase from 60 to 80%. Otherwise, no other changes to Great Axe. Taking a look at Great Sword, Roaring Rupture has had a little bit of a change. The Fortify is now 10% up from 8%, and it will last for 7 seconds instead of 5. And then the Skyward Slash for the final perk upgrade, Skyward Sword, is now a 2-meter radius on the hitbox instead of 3. So a little bit of a nerf there, but generally not super big changes to Great Sword. Taking a look at Hatchet, Infected Throw is now 140% base damage, so a bit of a buff there. Rending Throw's Rend is now 20% instead of 10%. That's a big deal because Rending Throw is a big part of playing a damage-based throwing hatchet build, so a nice change to that ability there. Social Distancing, they removed the distance condition from the root for the Stay Back upgrade, so this is just adding more utility to this ability. And Raging Torrent will allow you to block cancel when you would be able to dodge cancel out of it too now. So in general, big buffs I think to Throwing Hatchet here, which is nice because Throwing Hatchet is not super amazing. Taking a look at the Ice Gauntlet, Ice Pylon will now be destroyed if the Ice Gauntlet is unequipped. I'm pretty sure this means if you take the Ice Gauntlet off, not switch to your other weapon. Wind Chill got a little bit of a damage buff from 20% to 24% base weapon damage per tick, and the Grit is in the base part of the ability now, but otherwise not a super big buff to Ice Gauntlet or nerfs. Taking a look at Life Staff, they reduced the radius of Splash of Light from 100 meters to 25 meters, so pretty big nerf to that, but they did get a little bit of a buff in healing from 60 to 80%, and the mana regen has been increased from 5% to 15% as well. Otherwise, no other changes to the Life Staff. Musket got a couple changes, but that's really it. But they are nice changes for sure. Power Shot and Powder Burn upgrades no longer require a dedicated reload. So you could fire a regular shot and then follow it up with the Power Shot or Power Burn, kind of like an animation cancel on it. This is huge for Musket's burst damage, especially in PvP. Taking a look at Sword and Shield, there have been some pretty big changes and buffs to Sword and Shield. Whirling Blade got huge buffs. They sped up the attack, they increased the damage from 145 to 160%, they increased the size of the hitbox, and they increased the power of the rend from 5% to 15%. Whirling Blade's very unpopular, so maybe this will help increase the popularity of it. Reverse Stab, they slightly sped up the attack animation and they adjusted the homing to account for the updated attack speed. Yeah, I'll be honest, Reverse Stab is not a great skill because it almost entirely lacks utility compared to all your other Sword and Shield ability options. It's just hard to justify picking this. Defiant Stance will now reduce the attacker's stamina damage while active by 20%, so it'll make your block a little bit stronger too. And they made it so you can cancel out of the Defiant Stance a little bit smoother as well. Defensive Formation had an increase on that defensive damage reduction from 3 meters to 4 meter radius. And then Shield Rush, they reduced the recovery of the extra animation that is played with the upgrades by 7 frames. This basically means that you can do a Shield Rush into Shield Bash even if you take all of the upgrades on Shield Rush. You no longer have to only take the first Shield Rush perk in order to get that combo to work. So a very big buff to Sword and Shield across the board, which is arguably already one of the best and most popular weapons in PvP. Taking a look at Spear, Cyclone got a nice damage increase from 130% to 165%, and they sped up the attack. This is nice because Cyclone is already a skill that I do see people use in PvP every now and then. With the stamina sustain that it gets, it might become much more popular. Void Gauntlet, Baleful Tether will now keep the tether active when you swap to a secondary. This is huge. This is going to be a lot of synergy with a bunch of different weapons. The fact that you can take advantage of that tether even after swap. Yeah, this opens up a lot for Void Gauntlet. And Void Blade is now going to be affected by Grit with the 300 Con attribute passive, which is fantastic for Void Blade. Moving on to Warhammer, Mighty Gavel, they slightly increased the area or impact area of the attack. They reworked Justice for All to grant 1 free Mighty Gavel use per cooldown. I don't really know what that means. Are you going to be able to use Mighty Gavel twice per cooldown now instead of having to use it twice in a row? I'll have to try out on the PTR or see what those Hammer players are doing. Armor Breaker has had a damage increase from 140% to 160%. The Rend has gone up from 20 to 30%. That is an absolutely brutal Rend. An Opening Act is going to work against targets above 70% health now. So a bit of a buff to Warhammer, to a couple of its abilities. Taking a look at Rapier, we got some changes to the blood tree. Flurry will now deal consistent damage. It will deal a consistent 60% damage per hit instead of the 47 to 83% range that we had before. And the homing has been adjusted on it as well. Tondo's proper spacing will now deal the 100% base weapon damage if your opponent has a bleed on them instead of you having to be a certain distance away from them with Tondo. So not really huge changes here, just a little bit of functionality changes for Rapier. Invigorated Punishment has been nerfed, so it no longer works on basic attacks. This is a big change and makes Invigorated Punishment arguably not as good as it was before, and not the best in slot option across the board that it was before for PvP. And for all my Void Gauntlet enthusiasts, you will now be able to get thwarting strikes on your Void Gauntlets. Isn't that nice? Outpost Rush, there have been a couple changes. One of the nice fixes here, your melee attacks will no longer home towards unbuilt Outpost Rush structures. That is annoying when it happens, so I'm very happy about that. So looking at the individual changes for the fort updates, siege weapons now have increased health and damage. The base range thrust resist for gates has been increased, and that thrust resist will go up as you upgrade the gates as well. So you won't be able to do nearly as much damage, I think, to gates with those ranged attacks, especially things like bows. Taking a look at the corrupted portals, they have changed the event to give a brute summon after all the enemies have been defeated and you close the portal. The event is now on a timer, kind of like the Baron, and they removed that 750 Azoth bank that she had sitting there before. You'll now be able to get summon tokens from Alpha Wolves, Ugg and Doug, and the Corrupted Portal event. The Baroness has been changed so that there's an interactable shield wall at both entrances that prevents ranged attacks from going through in order to prevent the long-range sniping. Big change there. Big change there for sure. Personal scores will now give more points for defending and capturing, and on top of it, there is a personal score vector for tanking now. And finally, you will only drop half of your collected resources in Outpost Rush on death. Keep in mind, guys, that Outpost Rush is going to be seeing a lot of rework later on in this PTR testing cycle, so these are just the changes we get for now, but I do like a few of them. PvP arenas, the rewards have been increased for a PvP arena. The first two that you complete daily will now give 1 extra weapon or armor each. And these items are the same ones given to you from Outpost Rush, so they can be upgraded to 600 to receive that legendary perk as well. And the Azoth Salt and PvP XP you get has been increased based on the number of rounds won in that match. Open World PvP, you will now get a flat 800 PvP XP and Azoth Salt as long as the player that you kill has been PvP active for 10 minutes, instead of the ramping 100, 100, 800, and 1600 that we had before. I think this is a good change because honestly, most of the Open World PvP kills that I get no rewards for, so hopefully the 10-minute timer will make it a little bit better. Weapons and armor that drop from Open World PvP will now have PvP perks on them. Isn't that nice? And last but not least, let's take a look at the quality of life changes. The big one, and basically the only one I want to talk about, added a player-requested feature to be able to search for perks and gems within the inventory. Oh my god, this is so big. This is so big. This is something that I have wanted to see in the game. Lots of people have wanted to see in the game for a long time. So yeah, this one people will like. And that is it. I hope you guys are excited for this new patch. I know that I am, and there's a lot of stuff I want to test on that PTR. Tomorrow I'll be uploading some gameplay footage of those new arenas and the stuff that I tested for you guys. Of course, if you want to catch me live on Twitch, there's a link to my Twitch down below for you. You can check out my website, pvpnewworld.com, for a bunch of different written guides to PvP builds. And if you have a clip that you want to see in the New World Top 5, you can send that to Kristofer at pvpnewworld.com. This show is sponsored by ExpressVPN. They can help keep you safe on the internet, and you can get a deal with your first purchase with the link down below. And finally, a huge thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon for supporting. If you've supported in the past, or if you're supporting now, thank you so much for helping keep the show going. Thank you everybody just for tuning in and watching. I am very curious to hear what you guys think about these changes as well, so let me know. and I hope you're looking forward to more in the future. Have a good night, everybody, and I'll see you next time.